So I would just say, don't be paralyzed by the fact that you don't have this, perfect mission. Just think about what's important to you and verbalize it, put it out there. And then don't be a perfectionist and just revise as you go, but always be true to yourself, I would say. That's one takeaway I have.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Inner Wealth, the Forbes Ignite podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Cacal, CEO of Forbes Ignite. And every week I'll be sharing with you my conversations with unique, creative, and innovative people across all different industries. These are people who are intellectually curious explorers who are also redefining what it means to be successful today. From personal to professional, we cover it all to understand what drives our guests to blaze their own trails and create nimble solutions within the industries that touch each of our lives.
Our guest today is Yuan Ji, founder and CEO of Erstwhile Mezcal. She has an incredible background as an attorney turned entrepreneur, advocating for independent small family producers of mezcal. She always had the same values prior, during, and after practicing law, especially about consumer welfare and education. We talk about serving others through your business, the iterative process of uncovering your mission, translating the values into your work that you do, and so much more. I know you're gonna love what she has to say. Here's our chat. Hey, Yuan, how's it going? Thank you so much for joining me. It's so wonderful for you to be here.
Hi, Nicole. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited for this conversation.
Yeah, me too. And I've been looking forward to this conversation all week. And as I was mentioning to you earlier, I got your shipment of samples just in time for the conversation. So I'm super excited about that.
Excellent.
So I know that you have been pretty busy. You travel back and forth between Oaxaca, working with the family producers, producing mezcal. And I just wanted to know, what have you been up to lately?
Our mission, as you know, is advocating for independent, small, family-owned and operated mezcal producers, all of whom all my partners happen to be based in Oaxaca at the moment. We're not limited to Oaxaca. So I spent quite a bit of time in Oaxaca about this time last year, working on a new line of limited edition releases, because our product, our mezcal lineup, true to our mission, is constantly rotating. It's different agaves, different styles, flavor profiles, featuring these different independent small family producers, which is logistically more challenging than a more streamlined business model. But that line, distilled a year ago, finally landed in our warehouse in April. There were a lot of logistical nightmares that I'll spare you the not glorious details of. And, much bigger brands have faced supply chain disruptions. So we're not alone in this. But long story short, this mezcal finally landed in April. So ever since then, my efforts have shifted to this side of the border. Specifically, it's getting the mezcal out there, sharing the stories of our producers, why these mezcals are so exciting, these family stories in front of consumers like you and I, and also our distributors, their customers, bars and restaurants. So I've been traveling a lot.
And I know you have a very, very interesting background that I admire a lot. And I know in our last conversation, you were telling me a little bit about the transition from being an antitrust attorney to leading a mission-driven brand. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about your personal and professional journey to where you are today.
Definitely. Prior to starting Erstwhile Mezcal, I had a completely different careers. I was in private practice as an attorney for years. So this is definitely a career change, and it's not intuitive or it's confusing to many people. But for me, looking back, it made sense because I always had the same values, things that I cared about, things that I was interested in as a person. So thinking back to even in college, before I went to law school, I was a math and econ major because I was just naturally interested in those subjects. And antitrust, I was always interested in through law school. And as a practice area, I went for it right away because that's the one practice area in law that uses the most economics that I know. The shift from attorney to mezcal may be confusing, but I always think about my common values. As an attorney, the bigger picture is about consumer welfare. And a lot of people don't have any experience with antitrust attorneys in their life, so they don't necessarily understand at the core that it's about making sure there's healthy competition in any industry, which ultimately benefits consumers like ourselves because it leads to healthy competition, great product variety. It's about making sure there's no barriers to entry for any players, specifically small players. So those are the values that I brought over to Mezcal because there are tons of barriers to entry, especially for small players, especially for small mom and pop family producers that I think are important to represent, but lack that representation. And the other thing I'll add is that independent of my antitrust work, when I was an attorney, I also did a lot of pro bono work that is just representing individuals, families who don't have the resource to hire an attorney. And it would be a referral from a partner nonprofit. And they were almost all immigrants. And I'm first generation myself. So that work I found rewarding is making real differences in the lives of real people. And today my partner producers are still real people and they just happen to be Mezcal producers now.
Yeah.
So those are the commonalities.
I absolutely love that. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the initiatives that you're most proud of at Erstwhile?
One of our core values is education. It's specifically Mezcal education, and based on my firsthand experience as a consumer, Mezcal is a very visceral experience. Why I personally appreciate it, why I think a lot of other consumers like myself appreciate Mezcal as a category is the rustic nature, the viscerals, being there directly in front of the families and the producers, being able to taste and smell the air, the agave roasted for days, and then seeing the labor that goes on for days, natural fermentation is that entire experience, not exclusively what's inside the bottle, but as consumers here in the US, international markets, mostly what we have access to, which is first immediately is what's inside the bottle, but it relegates the rest, everything else that is compelling and worth sharing. So that's why education is super important for me. It's for consumers and also for industry people, because they're ultimately the gatekeepers that share the knowledge with their customers at the bar, at the restaurant. So everything we do event-wise is education-driven. To that end, some of our recent initiatives, we add a lot of great video content. So for our new releases, the QR code on the back of the bottle will go direct to the page dedicated to that bottling, no matter how small it was. And it's a lot of super short, entertaining, but educational content. Producer interviews, some of the actual footage of the actual batch in production, and just producers sharing knowledge, all with the goal of bringing consumers like ourselves as closely to producers as possible.
What I love the most about that is that you're really bringing out the best in these partner producers that you're working with. And you mentioned that they're not just vendors, those are actual partners of yours. And absolutely. I know, yeah, in our last conversation, you were saying that these partner producers sometimes don't get the representation they need, even in the largest cities in their state. So tell us more about that.
Again, that's just based on my experience, my limited but firsthand experience as a visitor, as a tourist, then curious consumer, and eventually evangelist, starting with my first trip to Oaxaca City, the capital of Oaxaca State, where all of my partner producers are based at the moment. So I would stay in Oaxaca City where there's resources like hotels and Airbnbs, but the producers are based in rural areas. So it requires a day trip and it may be an overnight trip, depending on how far away they are from the capital, if you want to visit them in person. And again, those trips, day trips or overnight trips, were my personal introduction to Mezcal and Mezcal producing families. But the thing that was very striking to me, even from that first trip, was I understand I cannot find their Mezcal back home in New York, but at least in Oaxaca City, that's their local capital, maybe in one store or one bar. And I would ask them, where can I find your Mezcal? Oaxaca City. And the answer is almost always nowhere. And that's still the case to this day. That hasn't changed. And there's so many more families that's their reality. Their reach is localized to their local communities, villages, maybe people driving by that just have known them throughout the years, possibly from other states, but the limitation in their local urban area was very striking to me.
I'm really curious, these trips that you used to take that introduced you to mezcal and the process and the education around it. What inspired you to take these trips? Were they just for fun in the beginning and then the interest just grew from there?
Yeah, my partner and co-founder, Kevin, thought I might like Oaxaca. He was right, but I was really just there on vacation. I was practicing law full time. The interest in mezcal, it was driven by curiosity largely. I was not a spirits aficionado or connoisseur. So aside from interest in good food and things that taste good, I noticed that mezcal cocktails were almost always the best cocktails on the menu. So that was one of my gateways, you can say, that triggered my curiosity. But our curiosity was, it's like, well, how do we learn about mezcal? We should take some education day trips, which was very good. It was just directly in front of small family producers at their distilleries, at their homes. It was first triggered by curiosity, which led to more and more trips, and it grew from there.
So why do you think we don't see more mission-driven brands in your industry, just generally speaking?
I think it might be several things. One, I think brands may not necessarily be thinking about mission. It depends on what their self-perception is. Like, I'm a brand, and why do I need to talk about mission? It's not necessarily an intuitive concept. You can talk about flavor profiles. You can talk about, I don't know, promo events. These are things that I think are more intuitive when it comes to running a brand, specifically in wine and spirits, in hospitality, but people don't necessarily think about mission. So I think one, that like connection is not the most intuitive one to make. Mm-hmm. Two, I think there may be, depending on self-perception, I think it's not limited to mezcal or spirits. There's this, I think, underlying assumption that profit and mission are mutually exclusive. So they don't go hand in hand. If you're a for-profit company, you're there to make money. Your goal is to make money. Or if you have a mission, why don't you just run a nonprofit? People don't say it like that. I really think there's this underlying unspoken assumption that these things are not consistent with each other, where why would you even talk about two things at the same time, mission and profit? And third, I think there are brands out there, some friends of mine in the industry that care about the same things, that do have core values. They are driven by values that are important to them, but they don't necessarily think about verbalizing it and articulating it and constantly thinking about it. And they don't have this burning desire to come up with a mission to the extent that, every business decision goes back to the mission. So I think it's like they do have those values, but it may not have occurred them to articulate and refine a mission.
Right. No, that's perfectly fair. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because part of our mission at Forbes Ignite is really trying to educate and emphasize that purpose and profit are not mutually exclusive, like you're saying. They can coexist. There are ways to work toward that. And the model may not be perfect, but there are always ways for that to coexist together.
Definitely.
So I want to go back to what inspired you. I know that you took those day trips out of curiosity, but who are some of your role models that have led you to this point?
Role models, I would say other entrepreneurs and small business owners. I can think of two examples specifically. So one is Cullen Brown, my partner and co-founder, who, well before we knew anything about mezcal, he's been a long time small business owner, and he runs a company called Geographicus, which is a rare antique map dealer and scholars. He's one of the country's top dealers in antique maps. So it's obscure, but very much a thriving market. And just watching him build the company, and he started that long before I had met him, and listening about his struggles. He started the company in his 20s, just purely as an internet business. It was not brick and mortar as we expect from a traditional gallery. Mm-hmm. And it was built on credit card debts and, plenty of that last dollar to pay rent more than once. But one of the things I admire about Kevin is that as a young person was always driven by values. He just thought about the things that are important to him, where he wanted his future to go. And one of the things that was striking to me is that he decided that he does not want to trade his time for money, which is refreshing. So one of my reactions was, well, but isn't that what you're doing now with your map business? You are spending time in return for profit and money. So you are still trading it. But really, I think the unspoken aspect is that there is inherent value in what we devote our limited time too, that independent of the paycheck landing in your account, there's value that's not monetary. I think that's the unspoken aspect that was very striking to me, and that I have never heard anyone phrase it like that. At the time, I was, working for a law firm in private practice, and there are a lot of unhappy lawyers. I think our culture, our aspirations is to be happy and to be passionate about what we do, but it's also common expected for people to be miserable, that there's no shame to complain and commiserate over how much you hate your job. So that's the dichotomy that we have in our culture. But a lot of times I think people are miserable because they are trading their time for money, because that's the only thing, that there is no other value except for the paycheck. I think that's the issue.
Yeah. Why is it that we've romanticized as a society just that burnout culture of complaining that I'm working like 20 hours a day and that tells of my productivity and that is everything that I am? But like you said, you are not your job. It's a means to be able to provide and to be able to articulate what really matters to you in life, but you are not your job. And so I try to articulate that as much as I can.
So yeah, going back to your question, I find that inspiring, that this idea of thinking about your values, spending some time to try to come up, maybe not succeeding right away, but to persist and keep at it, and try to think about what you truly care about in life, what are your values, and then guide your career choices, or try to carve a path out for yourself by following those values over the years it's admirable. And no one prior to that had really communicated that to me.
Right.
And I think there's other role models. Like the one that comes to mind is Tony Hsieh, who sadly passed away a couple years ago, the late CEO of Zappos and also serial entrepreneur. Just reading about his book, Delivering Happiness, my understanding is that he had also spent a lot of time thinking about specifically what is happiness, what are the things that people mean when they say, am I happy? And he boiled it down to a few principles, actually, that I think is accurate. And the other thing about him that was inspiring with Zappos is that you can run the successful business that your employees and your customers rave about, and you don't actually have to care about the underlying product. So in this case, he really didn't care about shoes. So Zappos started as shoe delivery, that I think he had maybe 3 pairs of shoes. Listening to, past podcast interviews, like it's not about the shoes. It's really passionate about customer service. It's an obsession with delivering happiness, helping your employees grow, serving others. So that was very novel and inspiring for me, that you can actually have this great business. And in this case, I do love mezcal, but even if I didn't, if I cared about it less, Erstwhile would still exist.
Right. No, I love that. And what you were telling me earlier about some of the initiatives that you do for your local producers and the partners that you have, if they, let's say, for example, they don't have the legal paperwork to be able to export into the United States, you front the costs and the fees in order to help them do that. So can you expand upon that a little bit more?
I see that as pro bono representation. So going back to my legal background, that in this case, it's not so different from my pro bono as an attorney. It's just that they need this thing, namely, they're interested in exporting into international markets. They're not quite sure where to start with the paperwork, and then what happens after you get a license, right? It's an ongoing journey. It's just not when the paperwork is just the beginning.
Yeah.
In my mind, I just see it as it's pro bono work. It's just that now this is my client and this is the issue that I have at hand. And so the company, everything Erstwhile does is really centered around that. So let's just start with the paperwork. So with the average small producer in Mexico, to export out of Mexico, you need more than one permit, be a registered exporter. You need to be registered in the alcohol beverage registry, right? So it's barriers that you need to cross.
Yeah.
So we always offer to every producer that we work with that if you're interested, right, we don't impose, but and every 2 small producers are different. So if you're interested in this, we can set you up with attorneys and accountants that we know locally. They can apply for this on your own. Any legal expenses will cover as a company. And I think independent of the expenses, which is obviously valuable, but in my mind, that more of the value comes from, it's not the money, it's more just the wherewithal, the saying, hey, do you want to do this? Because independent of working with us, you do need this in order to grow on your own terms. You want to export to other markets, other countries where we're not at the moment, then you're set up. This is a good thing to have if that's the direction you want to take. So if you want to do it, let's do this and we'll cover the expenses, but you are not beholden to us. You're set up going forward independent of Erstwhile. And of course, I hope to work with you for a long time, but that's the value that I see. It's the intangible, non-financial support, the guidance, in addition to cover the legal expenses. That's where I see has value for small producers.
There are two things that I gather from this that I feel like is really important for every listener to take note of. The first is you can use your skill sets and your talents to be able to help people and make an impact in your own way. And in your case, you used your legal expertise to be able to help these independent families and these producers. The second thing that I've taken from this is also that you're focused on the relationship. It's all about the relationship. And like you said, that's just the start of the journey. That's not the end. It's the start of the journey of the whole relationship, and you're taking care of them. And they're not beholden to you, but you're helping them in terms of expand their business, expand their reach, and you're telling their stories as well. So I find that really admirable, and I feel like a lot of people could learn from that.
Yeah, definitely are important to me. Everything that happens, I think, comes down to human relationships. Just, after they have the paperwork, it's not easy for our producers to travel to the US. So again, that's why Erstwhile, the company exists. We'll do our best to grow distribution for them one state at a time. But I didn't have any relationships. So I have to build those relationships. But it's not just that, now we have a distributor X. It's people do business with people. So I really believe in the adage because I build a relationship with decision maker who has a face and a name at that company that believes in what we're doing, that makes it possible for our producers. So everything comes down to relationships behind the scenes. And the same goes with our partner producers. It's my personal relationship with each individual at these families.
Absolutely. And do you have any favorite stories that you can share about some of the independent families that you've worked with? I'm looking at the samples that I have here, and I'm curious, what was the story behind working with the family that created the Tobola, for example?
So you have now about three different mezcal from the Hernandez family. We have a page dedicated to each producer family we work with, with video and photo content, again, with the goal of storytelling and bring them to life as much as possible, short of your next trip to Oaxaca and meeting them in person. So with the Hernandez family, it's Juan and Hortensia Hernandez. They live in Santiago Matalan, which is about an hour driving distance outside of Oaxaca City. So they were one of the first families I met on my first trip to Oaxaca, along with the Garcias who make the espadín. So those two families, they were two of the first mezcal producers I ever met in person. And the flagship line of different mezcal releases came from those two families. The Tobola and the Aroqueño, those all came from the Hernandez family, and they're both multi-generation producers. It's 5 generations on Hortensia's side and 4 on Juan's side, counting their kids at least. So just really nice and welcoming people. They're also, I consider them friends in addition to business relationships. So I've attended, family weddings and birthdays there and stayed overnight at their homes over the years. And then the Tobola and the Aroqueños are some of the last batches from Juan, who sadly passed away 2 years ago. And then from that point onward, right now it's an all-women distillery. So it's Hortensia and her daughters that are in charge. And so one of our newer releases is an all-women collaboration.
That's amazing. So I want to go back to your journey of being a woman founder and a woman CEO of your own brand, your own company, your own mission-driven company. What would you say to the listeners who are interested in starting their own social venture based on your experience?
I guess a couple of things. That one, it's good to think about coming up with a mission. It doesn't happen overnight. Just don't give up. It's really a process to think about your values, what's important to you, but also to crystallize a mission out of that is actually a process for me over time. But, when we started, the mission was always there. I always care about the same thing, but to articulate and verbalize it, to crystallize it is another thing.
Absolutely. I can attest to that your mission is not always going to become crystallized or become clear to you from the very beginning or from the get-go. And don't let analysis paralysis get to you. And I speak with so many other entrepreneurs who go through their own personal journeys, and they can probably say the same thing. They can probably say, oh, I've always known I wanted to do X, Y, and Z. But that purpose is something that comes to you when you have that time to reflect. And bringing this back to the point that you brought up in the beginning of this conversation, that ability to self-reflect is really critical and really important to the mission and values that you bring to the company. So I 100% agree with you.
Definitely. And then to that point, this reflection journey is not all on you, by which I mean you're not in an echo chamber. I think Erstwhile's mission was also just validated and encouraged and fed by feedback. So what resonates with our consumers or strangers I talk to, and that's the iterative process as well. And then see what resonates with people right away and see what resonates with them less. See what takes a long time for you to explain and stumble and trip over. It's also just, there's the benefit of practice. There's the benefit of talking to others and see what they validate. That feeds into this process of articulating your mission over time too.
Absolutely. And speaking of your mission, what's next for Erstwhile?
Our vision is definitely to onboard and work with more small producers that still don't have representation. Mm-hmm. And so currently we work with 4 partner producer families. So then the vision is just work with the families we already know, but bring on more small producers who can benefit from the platform we're building. And that's on the producer side. And then on the consumer end, we're slowly but surely building more distribution one state at a time. And eventually, I would love to be in international markets because it's not just limited to the US. It's really connecting small producers with mezcal lovers and consumers everywhere in the world. So yeah, it's a two-way platform to just onboard more producers and grow more distributions and more ways to reach consumers like ourselves faster, easier, better.
I really believe that a lot of new entrepreneurs and even existing companies can really learn from the model that Erstwhile is building. So I'm really excited to hear more about the progress and learn more about your expansion and learn about more things Erstwhile and the storytelling. So thank you so much, Yuan, for this wonderful conversation. It was such a pleasure speaking with you. And I hope we get to do this again soon.
Yes, thank you so much, Nicole. I really appreciate you reaching out and supporting us by picking up one of our bottles at your local store and then feeling that the story resonates with you enough to reach out. That's all part of what keeps me going. At the end of the day, it's the validation from consumers, from perfect strangers that find this work worthwhile. That's very rewarding to me. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Yuan. That's it for this week's episode of Inner Wealth. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and that you'll join us next week as we continue to explore all the ways success is being redefined in our ever-changing world. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast on your favorite podcast app, and follow us on Instagram at Forbes Ignite for more thought-provoking content and opportunities to engage with us. I'm your host, Nicole Cacal. Thanks for joining us.